She thought she'd been stood up, that 5 years of putting everyone else first had earned her nothing but an empty chair and cold coffee. But when two identical black boys in bright yellow shirts burst through that cafe door with determination burning in their eyes and a confession on their tongues, everything shifted. They weren't supposed to be there. Their father didn't know. And what they were about to tell her would transform a lonely evening into the beginning of a story none of them saw coming. Before we begin, we love knowing how far our stories of late love and little heroes spread. So we want to hear from you. Tell us where in the world you're watching from in the comments section. Don't forget to support us by clicking that subscribe button and liking this video. Your support helps us bring you more stories like this. Now let's continue. Nancy Butler checked her phone for the 9th time in 5 minutes. 6:47 p.m., 42 minutes late. She sat alone at a corner table in the Riverside Cafe, her fingers wrapped around a ceramic mug of black coffee that had gone from steaming to lukewarm to something that now tasted like disappointment. The evening light streaming through the windows should have felt warm and inviting. Instead, it felt exposing. Around her, couples leaned across tables, their laughter mixing with the soft acoustic music playing overhead. She was the only person sitting alone. Nancy told herself she'd give him 3 more minutes. Just 3. And then she'd text Megan, her colleague from the hospital who'd orchestrated this whole setup, and tell her that blind dates weren't her thing. That after 5 years of double shifts, emergency codes, and prioritizing everyone else's healing, maybe she'd forgotten how to risk her own heart. Maybe she'd been right to keep those walls up. Just one coffee date, Megan had insisted 4 days ago, cornering Nancy in the nurse's station during a rare, quiet moment. His name is Alexander Duke. He's 36, runs a tech company, and Nancy, I promise you, he's different. Just try. But trying hurt. And sitting here watching the door, feeling that familiar sting of rejection creeping up her spine, trying felt impossible. At 6:51 p.m., the bell above the door chimed. Nancy looked up, hope flickering despite every instinct telling her not to feel it. But it wasn't a man in his 30s. It wasn't Alexander Duke. It was 2 identical little boys. They couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with smooth brown skin that glowed under the cafe lights and bright, intelligent eyes that scanned the room with startling purpose. They wore matching bright yellow shirts tucked into dark jeans, and their small sneakers squeaked slightly against the wooden floor. Their hands were clasped together as they surveyed the space like tiny generals assessing a battlefield. And then those eyes locked onto Nancy. Before she could process what was happening, the boys marched straight toward her table with the kind of confidence that belonged to CEOs, not first graders. The slightly taller one, by maybe an inch, stopped directly in front of Nancy, tilted his head, and asked with complete seriousness, "Are you Miss Nancy?" Nancy blinked, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. Yes, I am." She set the cup down carefully. "And who are you?" "I'm Curtis," the boy announced, standing straighter. Then he gestured to his brother beside him. "This is Cooper, and our daddy—" He paused, glancing at his twin. "He's sorry he's late." The world seemed to tilt slightly. These were Alexander's sons. They had to be. But Megan hadn't mentioned children, hadn't mentioned twins, hadn't mentioned— "He had to stay at work," Cooper added softly, his voice gentler than his brother's, almost apologetic. "Because there was an emergency with the—" Curtis quickly covered his brother's mouth with one small hand. "Cooper." Nancy's confusion must have been written across her face in bold letters because Curtis sighed, a deep, weary sigh that seemed far too old for a 6-year-old, and pulled out the chair across from Nancy. He sat down with purpose, tugging his brother down beside him. "Okay," Curtis said, folding his hands on the table like he was about to lead a board meeting. "We should probably tell you the truth." "The truth?" Nancy echoed, her nurse instincts kicking in as she leaned forward slightly. "Daddy doesn't know we're here," Cooper whispered, guilt flickering across his small face like storm clouds. Nancy's eyes widened. "He doesn't? Wait, what?" "But he is sorry he's late," Curtis insisted, his tone urgent now. "We know because we heard him on the phone this afternoon right after school." Nancy felt herself being pulled in, drawn into their story, despite the absurdity of the situation. This afternoon? Cooper nodded, his expression earnest. We were doing homework at the kitchen table, but we heard him in his office. Someone called about a big problem. Something about servers crashing and contracts and code that wasn't working. He kept saying he couldn't believe this was happening tonight, Curtis continued. He said he had something really important at 6:30 at the Riverside Cafe. And you two figured out that something was me? Nancy asked, a smile tugging at her lips despite herself. We're very observant, Curtis said, matter-of-factly. It's a skill. We remembered the name because Daddy wrote it on the calendar in the kitchen, Cooper added, his voice dropping slightly. He circled it 4 times, and he drew a little smiley face next to your name. Something warm flickered in Nancy's chest, pushing back against the cold disappointment that had settled there. A smiley face. 4 circles. He was so nervous, Cooper continued, his eyes wide with the weight of the secret. He tried on 3 different shirts yesterday. Daddy never cares about shirts. Nancy couldn't help it. She laughed. It started soft, but grew genuine, filling the space between them. These 2 little boys sitting across from her with their matching yellow shirts and their earnest, serious faces had just turned her disappointing evening into something else entirely, something unexpected. So when we heard him say he might be really late because of the emergency, Curtis explained, straightening his shoulders, we made a plan. We asked Mrs. Williams, she lives next door, to bring us here. We told her it was really, really important. Nancy glanced toward the window. Sure enough, there was an elderly woman sitting in a silver sedan parked at the curb, watching the boys with a mixture of bewilderment and patient resignation. When she caught Nancy's eye, she gave a small, uncertain wave. We may have begged, Cooper admitted, his cheeks flushing slightly. A lot. Strategic begging, Curtis corrected firmly. It was necessary for mission success. Nancy pressed her lips together to keep from laughing outright. These boys were something else entirely, brilliant, brave, and utterly determined. Well, Nancy said, her voice warm now, the loneliness from earlier melting away. Would you 2 like to sit with me for a bit? Maybe have some hot chocolate while we wait? Their faces lit up like fireworks on New Year's Eve. Curtis immediately jumped out of his chair and ran to the window, waving enthusiastically at Mrs. Williams and giving her 2 big thumbs up. The elderly woman sighed, smiled, and nodded with the expression of someone who'd learned long ago that resistance was futile. When the boys settled back into their seats, Nancy caught the barista's attention and ordered 2 hot chocolates with extra whipped cream and a fresh cup of coffee for herself. This time, she planned to actually drink it while it was hot. As they waited, Nancy studied Curtis and Cooper more carefully. Beneath their confidence and determination, beneath the matching yellow shirts and the mission-ready attitude, there was something else, a weight, a shadow that children their age shouldn't have to carry. She recognized it. She'd seen it in pediatric patients before, that look of growing up too fast. So, Nancy said gently, folding her hands on the table and leaning in slightly, tell me about your dad. Does he go on many dates? The question hung in the air for a heartbeat. The twins exchanged a glance, some silent communication passing between them in that mysterious language only siblings seemed to share. Then Curtis shook his head slowly, his confident demeanor softening. Never, he said quietly. You're the first one. The first one since Mommy died. The noise of the cafe, the hiss of the espresso machine, the chatter of other customers, the gentle clink of cups and spoons, all of it seemed to fade into the background, muffled like sound underwater. Nancy felt her heart clench, her breath catching in her throat. When did that happen? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her nurse training kicking in even as her heart ached. 3 years ago, Cooper said, his small hands fidgeting with the edge of the table. Right after we turned 3, she got really sick really fast. The doctor said it was something with her heart, Curtis added, his voice steady but tight. An aneurysm. She was here one day and then she wasn't. An aneurysm. The word echoed in Nancy's mind, clinical and devastating. She'd seen it before, sudden, cruel, impossible to predict. She reached across the table instinctively and gently squeezed both boys' hands. I'm so sorry, Nancy said softly, meaning every word. Daddy took care of us all by himself, Curtis said, and now there was fierce pride in his voice, the kind of loyalty that made Nancy's eyes sting. He learned how to braid hair. He learned how to make our lunches. He even learned how to do the voices when he reads bedtime stories. He's really good at the dinosaur voice, Cooper added with a small smile. But he's been sad, Curtis continued, his expression growing more serious. Not always, but sometimes we hear him at night, talking to Mommy's picture. He thinks we're asleep, but we're not. Nancy's throat tightened. He works all the time now, Cooper said quietly. He says it helps, but we think he's just scared. Scared of what? Nancy asked gently. The boys looked at each other again, and this time Curtis's confident mask slipped entirely. Scared of forgetting her, he whispered, and scared of being happy again. The words landed heavy and true, settling into Nancy's chest. She understood that fear. She'd spent 5 years building walls around her own heart, convincing herself that being needed was enough, that saving others meant she didn't have to risk being saved herself. The barista arrived with 2 towering mugs of hot chocolate, each crowned with a mountain of whipped cream. The boys' faces transformed instantly, wonder replacing sorrow as they reached for the warm mugs. "Thank you, Miss Nancy," Cooper said politely. "Yeah, thanks," Curtis added, then took a sip that left a whipped cream mustache across his upper lip. Nancy smiled, but her mind was racing. Somewhere across the city, Alexander Duke was fighting to fix servers and save contracts, completely unaware that his sons had just done something far braver than he'd managed in 3 years. They'd shown up, they'd risked, they'd chosen hope over fear. And sitting here with these 2 remarkable boys in their bright yellow shirts, Nancy realized something that made her heart both ache and soar. Maybe this wasn't about being stood up at all. Maybe this was about 3 people, a widowed father and his twin sons, finally ready to let someone in. And maybe, just maybe, she was ready too. Curtis wiped the whipped cream from his upper lip with the back of his hand, then leaned forward with the intensity of someone about to share classified information. "We need to tell you something else," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "About this afternoon." Nancy set down her coffee cup, giving him her full attention. "I'm listening." "When we heard Daddy on the phone," Curtis continued, "he wasn't just saying he might be late. He was talking about canceling." The word came out heavy, weighted with disappointment. He kept saying, "The servers crashed again. I can't leave. I'll have to reschedule." Cooper nodded, his fingers tracing patterns in the condensation on his mug. "He always says that. The servers crashed. The system's down. There's an emergency." His voice carried a sadness that made Nancy's chest tighten. "He's always fixing something." "Except himself," Curtis added quietly, and the maturity in those 3 words nearly broke Nancy's heart. There was a pause, heavy and honest, before Cooper looked up at Nancy with eyes that seemed far too old for 6. "We wanted to fix him," he whispered. "That's why we came." Nancy felt something shift inside her, like a door she'd kept locked for years, suddenly creaking open. These boys hadn't just shown up to save a date, they'd shown up to save their father. "So you 2 decided to take matters into your own hands?" Nancy asked gently. "We had to," Curtis said with a firm nod. "Daddy's really smart, like genius smart. He can build entire computer systems and make apps and solve problems that make other people's brains hurt." Pride radiated from him. "But when it comes to people stuff, he's kind of stuck." "Stuck how?" Nancy asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Cooper's voice was barely audible. "Stuck in the sad place. The place where Mommy used to be." The cafe seemed to grow quieter around them, or maybe Nancy's focus had simply narrowed to these 2 remarkable children sitting across from her, trying so desperately to help a father who didn't even know he was being rescued. "After we heard him say he was going to cancel," Curtis explained, "we went to our room and made a plan. We knew Mrs. Williams was coming over to watch us while Daddy went out. At least, That was the original plan. Mrs. Williams is really nice, Cooper interjected. She brings us cookies and lets us watch documentaries about space. She's also a little bit of a pushover, Curtis added with a mischievous grin that made him look exactly like the 6-year-old he was. We told her that Daddy was at a really important meeting here and that he asked us to come surprise him. We said it was for his birthday. His birthday's not until March, Cooper admitted guiltily. Nancy couldn't help but smile. So you lied. Strategically misrepresented the facts, Curtis corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Nancy asked, one eyebrow raised. In emergencies, yes, Curtis said with complete seriousness. Nancy glanced toward the window again where Mrs. Williams still sat in her sedan, now scrolling through her phone with the patience of a saint. Does she know you lied? Probably, Cooper said, wincing slightly. Mrs. Williams is pretty smart, but she drove us anyway because she said, and I quote, "That man needs to start living again before you boys grow up and leave him alone in that big house." The words hit Nancy square in the chest. Even a neighbor could see it. Alexander Duke was drowning in his own grief, in his own isolation, and everyone around him was watching it happen. "Tell me more about your dad," Nancy said softly, shifting the conversation away from their covert operation. "What's he like when he's not fixing servers?" The twins exchanged one of their silent glances again, and Nancy was struck by how in sync they were, how they seemed to communicate entire conversations with just a look. "He's really good at bedtime," Cooper offered first. "He does all the voices when he reads stories. The dragon sounds scary, and the princess sounds fancy, and the knight sounds brave." "He makes really good pancakes," Curtis added, "but only on Saturdays. During the week, it's cereal or toast because he's always rushing to get to work. He helps with our homework even when he's tired," Cooper continued. "Last week he fell asleep at the kitchen table while I was doing math, but when I woke him up, he still helped me figure out the word problems. He never misses our school events," Curtis said, "even when he has big meetings. He came to our science fair last month and helped us explain our volcano to the judges." Nancy listened, building a picture in her mind of a man who was doing everything right for his children while simultaneously falling apart inside. She recognized it because she'd spent 5 years doing the same thing, showing up for everyone else while neglecting the broken pieces of herself. "He sounds like an amazing father," Nancy said warmly. "He is," Curtis said, his voice fiercely protective. "But he's also really sad sometimes. We can tell." "How can you tell?" Nancy asked gently. Cooper's small hands stilled on his mug. "He keeps Mommy's picture by his bed, on her side, and sometimes, when he thinks we're asleep, we hear him talking to her." Nancy's throat tightened. "He tells her about his day," Curtis added quietly. "About work stuff, about us, about things he wishes she could see." His voice cracked slightly. "He tells her he's sorry." "Sorry for what?" Nancy whispered. Curtis shrugged, but his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "We don't know. Maybe for still being here when she's not. Maybe for not knowing how to be happy anymore." The weight of it settled over the table. Grief, love, guilt, and the impossible burden of children watching their parents slowly disappear into sorrow. "He never talks about her when we're awake," Cooper said. "I think he's trying to protect us, but we remember her too. We want to talk about her, but Daddy gets this look on his face when we try, like it hurts too much." Nancy reached across the table and took both boys' hands in hers. "Grief is complicated," she said softly, speaking from a well of her own buried pain. "Sometimes people think they're protecting the ones they love by not talking about the hurt. But really, they're just carrying it all alone." "That's why we wanted him to come tonight," Curtis said, squeezing her hand. "Because maybe if he has someone to talk to, someone who's not a picture, maybe he'll remember how to smile again. Like really smile, not the fake ones he gives us when he thinks we're worried." "He used to laugh all the time," Cooper added wistfully, "before Mommy died. Now he only laughs when we do something really funny, and even then, it's different. Quieter." Outside the cafe windows, the evening sky had begun to darken. Not with the gentle fade of dusk, but with something heavier. Storm clouds rolling in from the east, thick and gray and promising rain. The wind picked up, sending leaves skittering across the sidewalk and making the cafe's hanging sign creak on its hinges. Nancy noticed the shift in weather, and something about it felt symbolic, like the universe was setting the stage for whatever came next. "We should probably tell you one more thing," Curtis said, his confidence wavering slightly for the first time since they'd sat down. "What's that?" Nancy asked. "Daddy doesn't really know how to talk to people he likes," Cooper said carefully. "Not anymore. Work people are easy because it's all about computers and code. But real people? People where feelings are involved?" He shook his head. "He'll probably say something awkward, or forget to ask you questions, or talk too much about programming. He might even try to leave early," Curtis added, "because that's what he does when things get too real. He runs back to work where everything makes sense." Nancy felt a pang of recognition. She'd done the same thing for years, run back to the hospital, back to her patients, back to the safety of being needed rather than risking being wanted. "Well," Nancy said, offering them a reassuring smile, "how about we make a deal? When your dad gets here, if he gets here, I promise to give him a real chance. No judgments, no pressure, just a conversation between two people who maybe both need to remember what that feels like." The twins' faces brightened instantly. "Really?" Cooper asked, hope lighting up his features. "Really," Nancy confirmed. "Besides, anyone who raised two boys this smart and brave can't be all that bad at people." Curtis grinned. "We're pretty great, aren't we?" "Exceptionally," Nancy agreed with a laugh. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low and warning. The cafe lights flickered briefly, and several customers looked up, murmuring about the sudden storm. Rain began to patter against the windows, light at first, then building steadily into a downpour that streaked the glass and blurred the streetlights outside. Mrs. Williams had turned on her windshield wipers, and Nancy could see her peering through the rain toward the cafe entrance, clearly wondering when this little adventure would end. "He's going to come," Curtis said suddenly, more to himself than to Nancy. "He has to." "He will," Cooper added, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "He wouldn't just not show up, right?" Nancy looked at these two boys, these brave, wonderful boys who'd risked everything on the belief that their father deserved another chance at happiness, and made a silent promise. Whether Alexander Duke walked through that door or not, she wouldn't let them think this had been a mistake. She wouldn't let them carry the weight of their father's fear. "Right," Nancy said firmly. "And if he doesn't, it won't be because of anything you did wrong. Sometimes grown-ups are just scared. And that's on us, not you." The storm continued to build outside, rain now hammering against the windows with increasing intensity. Inside the warm glow of the cafe, Nancy Butler sat with two 6-year-old boys in bright yellow shirts, and together they waited. They waited for a man who was probably still staring at computer screens across the city. They waited for a father who'd forgotten how to fight for himself. They waited for the moment when everything would either fall beautifully into place or fall painfully apart. And as lightning flashed in the distance, Nancy realized she wasn't just waiting for Alexander Duke anymore. She was waiting to see if she still remembered how to take a chance on something that scared her too. 6 miles across the city, Duke Technologies, 7:04 p.m. Alexander Duke's fingers flew across the keyboard, his eyes bloodshot and burning as lines of code scrolled across 3 monitors simultaneously. The office around him had emptied hours ago. His team sent home after the initial crisis had been identified. But Alex remained, hunched over his desk in the glow of blue screens, fighting a battle only he seemed capable of winning. Come on," he muttered, running the diagnostic for the 7th time. The system failure had hit at 5:47 p.m., 17 minutes before he was supposed to leave for the cafe. 17 minutes before the most terrifying thing he'd agreed to do in 3 years. A major client's entire database had corrupted during a routine update. Thousands of customer records, financial transactions, inventory data, all of it scrambled into digital chaos. If he couldn't restore it, Duke Technologies would lose its biggest contract. Worse, a company that had trusted him would lose everything. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd spent 3 years building walls out of work, convincing himself that code was cleaner than feelings, that fixing systems was safer than fixing himself. And now, those same walls were trapping him. His phone buzzed for the 14th time. He didn't need to look to know it was probably Megan, Nancy's colleague, the one who'd set this whole thing up, the one who'd somehow convinced him that maybe, possibly, it was time. Just one date, she'd said. Nancy's wonderful, kind, smart, and Alex, she understands what it's like to lose yourself in work because you're afraid to face everything else. He'd circled the date on his calendar 4 times, drew a smiley face, ironed 3 different shirts before settling on the navy blue one. He'd even practiced conversation starters in the bathroom mirror like some nervous teenager, feeling ridiculous and hopeful and terrified all at once. And then the servers crashed. Of course they did. Mr. Duke. Alex looked up to find Jennifer, his assistant, standing in the doorway of his office. She was still here, even though he'd told her to go home an hour ago. Her arms were crossed, and her expression carried that particular mixture of exasperation and concern he'd grown familiar with over the past 3 years.
"Jennifer, I told you. It's past 7, she interrupted firmly. "You were supposed to be at the Riverside Cafe at 6:30. "I know what time it is," Alex said, turning back to his screens. "I just need 5 more minutes, maybe 10. The restoration protocol is almost—" "You said 5 more minutes 45 minutes ago," Jennifer countered, walking into the office. "Alex, the woman is waiting for you." "The company's entire reputation is hanging by a thread," Alex shot back, but his voice lacked heat. It sounded hollow even to his own ears. "I can't just leave." "Yes, you can," Jennifer said, her voice softening. "Marcus is on standby. He can take over. You trained him for exactly this kind of situation." Alex's hands stilled on the keyboard. She was right. Marcus was more than capable. But admitting that meant admitting the truth. He wasn't staying because he was the only one who could fix this. He was staying because he was terrified of what waited for him across the city. His eyes drifted to the framed photo on his desk. Curtis and Cooper at their kindergarten graduation, wearing matching caps and gowns, their smiles so bright it hurt to look at them. Beside it, though he kept it turned slightly away, was another photo. Sophia, his wife, taken 2 months before the aneurysm that stole her from them. "What are you doing?" he could almost hear her voice asking. "Alex, what are you so afraid of?" "She's probably left already," Alex said quietly, the defeat in his voice unmistakable. "It's been over 30 minutes. No one waits that long." "Then you apologize," Jennifer said simply. "You show up late and you apologize and you try. That's what people do, Alex. That's what you used to do before—" She stopped herself, but the unspoken words hung heavy in the air. "Before Sophia died. Before you forgot how to be anything except a father and a CEO. Before you locked yourself away." Alex closed his eyes, his chest tight with a familiar guilt. "I don't know how to do this anymore, Jen. I don't know how to sit across from someone and just talk about normal things without feeling like I'm betraying—" His voice broke. "Sophia would want you to be happy," Jennifer said softly, and it wasn't the first time she'd said it. She'd worked for him for 8 years. She'd been at the funeral. She'd watched him hollow out. She'd want those boys to see their father smile again. Curtis and Cooper. God. They'd been so excited when he told them he was going on a date. They'd helped him pick out his shirt, insisted he use the cologne Sophia had bought him for their last anniversary together. They'd waved him off with grins and thumbs up, shouting, "Don't be nervous, Daddy." And here he was, hiding behind a computer screen. 5 more minutes, Alex said again, but this time it sounded like a prayer more than a promise. "I just need to make sure the backup completes. Then I'll—" Thunder cracked outside, so loud it rattled the windows. The office lights flickered, and Alex's monitors went dark for a heart-stopping second before the backup generators kicked in. The storm had arrived. Riverside Cafe, 7:08 p.m. "Servers before supper," Curtis announced in a deep, exaggerated voice that was clearly meant to mimic his father. He puffed out his chest and frowned seriously at his hot chocolate. "Boys, I cannot eat dinner
until I have thoroughly examined all the digital infrastructure." Cooper dissolved into giggles, nearly spilling his drink. Nancy found herself laughing too, genuine, surprised laughter that felt foreign after 5 years of controlled smiles and professional composure. "Does he really sound like that?" Nancy asked, wiping tears from the corners of her eyes. "Exactly like that," Cooper confirmed between laughs, "especially when he's trying to sound important on conference calls." Curtis adjusted his posture back to normal, grinning. "He also says things like, 'Let's circle back on that,' and 'I'll ping you later,' and our personal favorite, 'That's not a bug, that's an undocumented feature.'" "I have no idea what that last one means," Nancy admitted. "Neither do we," Curtis said cheerfully, "but he thinks it's hilarious." The cafe had grown quieter as the dinner rush faded into evening. A few couples remained, a college student typing on a laptop in the corner, and an elderly man reading a newspaper by the window. The storm continued its assault outside, rain hammering the windows, wind howling through the streets, thunder providing percussion to the soft jazz still playing overhead. Nancy glanced at her phone. 7:09 p.m. 54 minutes late now. She should feel angry, frustrated. She should gather her things, thank the boys for a lovely evening, and head home to her quiet apartment where she'd heat up leftover soup and pretend this hadn't hurt. But looking at Curtis and Cooper, their yellow shirts now slightly rumpled, whipped cream staining Cooper's collar, both of them watching her with hope in their eyes, she couldn't bring herself to leave. "Can I tell you a secret?" Cooper asked suddenly, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Nancy leaned in. "Of course." "Daddy doesn't like dating," Cooper said, the words tumbling out quickly like he was afraid he'd lose his nerve. "He told Uncle Marcus, that's his work friend, he told him that coding makes more sense than people, that computers don't disappoint you or leave you or—" He stopped, his small face crumpling slightly. "Or die," Curtis finished quietly, the boldness gone from his voice. Nancy's heart cracked open. There it was, the raw truth beneath everything else. Alexander Duke wasn't just busy or forgetful or trapped by work. He was terrified. Terrified of connection, of vulnerability, of opening himself up to loss again. "I understand that," Nancy heard herself say, her voice thick with emotion. "I understand that more than you know." "You do?" Curtis asked, his eyes widening. Nancy nodded slowly. "I spend every day at the hospital taking care of people, helping them heal, watching them fight to stay alive. And you know what I do when I'm not there?" She paused, the admission feeling like pulling shrapnel from an old wound. "Nothing. I go home and I rest, so I can go back and do it again. Because work makes sense. Patients need me in a way that's clear and simple. But people in my life, friends, family, relationships, those are messy and complicated and scary," Cooper finished for her. "Yeah," Nancy whispered. "Scary." Curtis reached across the table and patted her hand with his small one. "Maybe you and Daddy are the same kind of scared." The words hung in the air, profound in their simplicity. Lightning flashed outside, brilliant white against the dark sky, followed immediately by a crack of thunder so loud that several people in the cafe jumped. The lights flickered again, once, twice, and Cooper grabbed his brother's arm instinctively. "It's okay," Nancy said automatically, her nurse instincts kicking in. "Just a storm. We're safe in here." But even as she said it, she wondered if that was true, because she'd spent 5 years being safe, building walls, convincing herself that protecting her heart was the same as living. And these two boys in their bright yellow shirts had walked through the door and dismantled every excuse she'd used to keep people out. Curtis suddenly straightened, his eyes fixed on something beyond the window. "Maybe Daddy's coming now," he said, hope brightening his voice. Nancy followed his gaze to the street, where headlights cut through the rain, cars passing slowly through the storm. But none of them stopped. None of them pulled up to the cafe. "Maybe," Nancy said gently. But doubt had crept into her voice. Cooper's shoulders slumped slightly. "Or maybe he's still at work." "Servers before supper," Curtis said again, but this time there was no humor in it. Just resignation. Just the familiar disappointment of children who'd learned that their father's promises came second to everything else. Nancy looked at these two remarkable boys who'd been brave enough to show up for their father, even when he couldn't show up for himself, and she made a decision. "You know what?" she said, squaring her shoulders. "Whether your dad makes it tonight or not, I'm glad you two walked through that door. You've turned what should have been a disappointing evening into something I'm going to remember for a very long time." Curtis smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. "That's really nice, Miss Nancy. But we really hoped—" Another crack of thunder, closer this time. The cafe lights flickered once more, and in that moment of wavering darkness, Nancy saw something shift in both boys' faces. Not hope, fear. Because if their father didn't come, if their brave mission failed, they'd have to go home and face the reality that maybe he was too broken to be fixed. Maybe love wasn't enough. Maybe showing up didn't matter after all. The light stabilized. The storm raged on, and together, the three of them kept waiting. At 7:23 p.m., the bell above the cafe door chimed, sharp and clear above the storm's rumble. Nancy's head snapped up. Curtis and Cooper turned in their seats simultaneously, their small bodies going rigid with anticipation. And there, framed in the doorway like something out of a film, stood Alexander Duke. He was drenched, completely, utterly soaked through. Rain dripped from his dark hair, which was plastered to his forehead. His navy blue shirt, the one he'd so carefully ironed, clung to his shoulders and chest, darkened with water. His dress pants were splattered with mud from the knees down, and his work badge still hung around his neck on a lanyard, identifying him as Alexander Duke, founder and CEO. He stood frozen in the entrance, one hand still on the door handle, his chest heaving like he'd run the entire 6 miles from his office. Water pooled at his feet. His eyes, dark brown and wide with something between panic and disbelief, scanned the cafe until they landed on the corner table. On his sons, on Nancy, on the scene that was quite clearly not what he'd expected to find. For 3 suspended heartbeats, no one moved. Then Alex's expression shifted from shock to recognition to something that looked an awful lot like horror. "Curtis." His voice cut through the cafe's gentle ambiance. "Cooper." He took 2 steps forward, water squelching in his shoes. "What did you do?" The twins exchanged one of their silent glances, this one heavy with the weight of the uh-oh variety. Curtis recovered first, standing up from his chair with the posture of a lawyer about to deliver his closing argument. "We saved your date," he announced proudly, though his voice carried a slight tremor of uncertainty. "You saved my—" Alex stopped, running a hand through his wet hair, which only made it stick up at odd angles. "You weren't supposed to be here. You were supposed to be at home with Mrs. Williams. How did you—" His eyes darted between his sons and Nancy, trying to piece together what had clearly been an elaborate operation. "Oh, God! Mrs. Williams, does she know where you are?" "She's right outside," Cooper said quickly, pointing toward the window where the elderly woman's sedan was still parked, wipers moving steadily across the windshield. "We told her we were surprising you for your birthday." "My birthday is in March," Alex said flatly. "We know," Curtis admitted, having the grace to look sheepish. "We strategically misrepresented the facts. You lied. In an emergency—" "Yes." Alex closed his eyes and pinched the bridge of his nose, a gesture that suggested this was not the first time his sons had gotten creative with the truth. When he opened them again, he looked at Nancy properly for the first time, and something shifted in his expression. Even soaked and disheveled, and clearly mortified, Nancy could see what Megan had meant. He had kind eyes, tired eyes, the kind that held too much weight and not enough light. And right now, those eyes were filled with an apology so profound it needed no words. "Miss Butler," he said, his voice hoarse. "I am so— Nancy," she interrupted gently, offering him a lifeline. "Please, just Nancy. Nancy." He tested the name, then seemed to remember he was dripping all over the cafe floor. "I am so sorry. This isn't—" He gestured vaguely at the table, at his sons, at himself. None of this was supposed to happen like this. Nancy stood, her movements calm and measured, the same energy she used with panicked patients in the ER. "Why don't you sit down?" she suggested, gesturing to the empty chair beside Curtis. "You look like you've had quite an evening." Alex glanced at the chair, then back at her, uncertainty written across his features. "I don't want to impose any more than I already have. My sons have clearly ambushed you." "They kept me company," Nancy said, and she meant it. "And honestly, they're much better conversationalists than most of my blind dates have been." That earned a surprised laugh from Alex, short and sharp and almost involuntary. He looked at his boys, who were watching him with matching expressions of hope and worry, and something in him seemed to relent. "Okay," he said quietly, moving toward the table. He pulled out the chair and sat, immediately creating a small puddle beneath him. "But I owe you an explanation. A real one." Curtis and Cooper sat back down, their eyes darting between their father and Nancy like they were watching the world's most important tennis match. "There was a system failure at the office," Alex began, his words tumbling out faster than he probably intended. "A major one. One of our biggest clients, their entire database corrupted during what should have been a routine update. Thousands of records, financial data, everything just scrambled." He shook his head, water droplets flying. "I couldn't leave until I knew the restoration protocol was working. If I'd left and something went wrong, people were counting on you," Nancy finished for him. "Yes." He looked relieved that she understood. "Exactly that." "I get it," Nancy said, sitting back down across from him. She caught Cooper's eye and smiled. "I'm a nurse at City General. I know what it's like when you can't leave until the crisis is handled. When walking away feels impossible, even when you know you should." Alex blinked, processing this. "You're a nurse?" "5 years at the ER, Nancy confirmed. "So trust me when I say I understand missing things because work won't let you go." Something passed between them. A recognition, an understanding of what it meant to be needed in ways that consumed you. Alex's shoulders, which had been hunched with tension, dropped slightly. "Still," he said, his voice softer now, "I'm an hour late. Almost an hour. That's unforgivable." "Daddy," Cooper said quietly, "Miss Nancy waited for you." Alex turned to his son, surprise flickering across his face. "She did?" "We all did," Curtis added firmly. Nancy felt her cheeks warm under Alex's gaze. "Well," she said, aiming for lightness, "your sons are very persuasive. They made a compelling case for why I shouldn't write you off just yet." "Did they?" Alex asked, his tone caught between amusement and mortification. He looked at the twins. "And what exactly did you tell Miss Nancy, about me?" The boys exchanged another glance. "Just that you're really smart," Cooper said innocently. "And that you make good pancakes on Saturdays," Curtis added. "And that you do all the voices during bedtime stories," Cooper continued. "And that you still keep Mommy's picture by your bed," Curtis said, and the cafe seemed to hold its breath. Alex froze, his expression cracking open with raw emotion he couldn't quite mask. "Curtis, it's okay, Daddy," Cooper said quickly, reaching for his father's hand. "We wanted her to know. We wanted her to know you're sad sometimes, but that you're trying." The vulnerability in that moment, in Alex's eyes, in the way his jaw tightened like he was fighting to keep himself together, in the fierce protectiveness of his sons, made Nancy's chest ache. "Mr. Duke," she started. "Alex," he interrupted, his voice rough. "If we're doing this, it's Alex." "Alex," she said gently, "I think your sons might be the bravest people I've met in a very long time, and judging by the fact that they went through all this trouble, I'd say you're doing something very right as a father." Alex looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time since walking through the door, he seemed to see her as more than just the woman he'd stood up. He saw her kindness, her patience, the way she'd welcomed his children instead of walking away in anger. "I don't deserve," he began, but Nancy shook her head. "Don't," she said softly. "Let's not start with what we deserve. Let's just start with right now." The moment stretched between them, fragile and tentative and full of possibility. Then the barista appeared at their table, carrying a small plate of chocolate chip cookies that were clearly meant for the twins. "These are on the house," she said with a warm smile, "for the two best matchmakers I've ever seen." Curtis and Cooper lit up, reaching for the cookies with delighted thank yous. The tension that had been wound tight around the table loosened, unwinding like a spool of thread. Alex watched his sons devour their cookies with the single-minded focus only children possessed, and something in his expression softened. When he looked back at Nancy, there was the ghost of a smile on his lips. "You've got quite the PR team," Nancy said, unable to resist the tease. And then it happened. Alex laughed. Not the polite chuckle he'd managed earlier, not a nervous release of tension, but a real laugh, full and genuine and surprised, like he'd forgotten his own body was capable of making that sound. It started in his chest and built upward, shaking his shoulders, crinkling the corners of his eyes, transforming his entire face from exhausted and apologetic to something warmer, younger, more alive. Curtis and Cooper stopped mid-chew, their eyes going wide. "Daddy laughed," Cooper whispered to his brother, wonder in his voice. "I told you this would work," Curtis whispered back. Alex heard them and laughed harder, covering his face with one hand. "I can hear you, you know." "We know," Curtis said, grinning triumphantly. "We wanted you to." Nancy found herself laughing too, at the absurdity of it all, at these ridiculous, wonderful boys, at the man sitting across from her who was still dripping rainwater, but who suddenly looked more human than the polished CEO she'd imagined. The cafe seemed to wrap around them, creating a pocket of warmth against the storm still raging outside. Other customers glanced over, smiling at the sound of their laughter. The barista winked at Nancy from behind the counter. And in that moment, with rain streaking the windows, cookies crumbling on the table, two boys in yellow shirts beaming with pride, and a man learning to laugh again, the Riverside Cafe became something more than just a place. It became a crossroads, a place where four lives intersected, a place where walls began to crack, a place where, despite terrible timing and soaked clothes and elaborate six-year-old schemes, something real began to take shape. Alex wiped his eyes, his laughter finally subsiding into a genuine smile. "I can't believe you waited," he said to Nancy. "I can't believe you stayed." Nancy met his eyes, dark and warm, and finally open. "Neither can I," she admitted, "but I'm glad I did." "So am I," Alex said quietly. Curtis and Cooper exchanged a victorious high five under the table, and outside, the storm began, very slowly, to fade. The laughter had settled into something softer, comfortable smiles, and the easy quiet that comes when strangers begin to feel less strange. Alex had stopped dripping quite so dramatically, though his shirt remained decidedly damp. Curtis was working on his second cookie, while Cooper picked the chocolate chips out of his, eating them individually with surgical precision. Nancy glanced at her watch. 7:47 p.m. She'd been at this cafe for over an hour, and somehow, impossibly, she didn't want to leave. "Well," Alex said, clearing his throat and shifting in his chair, "I should probably get these two home. It's past their dinner time, and Mrs. Williams is likely wondering if she's been accessories to a kidnapping." He glanced toward the window where the elderly woman was still patiently waiting, now reading something on her phone. "Actually," Nancy heard herself say before she could second-guess it, "have you all eaten? Because I haven't, and since we're all here—" She trailed off, letting the invitation hang in the air. Curtis's head snapped up so fast, Nancy worried about whiplash. "Are you asking us to dinner?" "I suppose I am," Nancy said, surprised by her own boldness. "If you'd like, no pressure." "Yes!" Cooper nearly shouted, then caught himself and lowered his voice. "I mean, that would be really nice, Miss Nancy." Alex looked stunned, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't quite find words. "Nancy, you don't have to. I mean, after everything tonight, you've already been so patient." "I'm hungry," Nancy said simply, "and I'm guessing you three are too. So why not?" A slow smile spread across Alex's face, genuine and a little disbelieving. "Okay," he said softly. "Yes, that would be really nice." Pizza, Curtis announced immediately. There's a place 2 blocks down with the best pepperoni. Or Chinese, Alex interjected, and there was something in his tone, something weighted with memory. There's a Chinese place around the corner, Golden Dragon. It's tradition. The twins went quiet, exchanging one of their meaningful glances. Tradition? Nancy asked gently. Alex nodded, his fingers drumming against the table, a nervous habit, Nancy noted. Sophia, my wife, she loved Chinese food. Every Friday night, no matter how busy things got, we'd order from Golden Dragon. Sweet and sour chicken for her, beef and broccoli for me, fried rice for the boys. His voice caught slightly. We haven't been back since Mommy died, Cooper finished quietly. The air around the table grew heavy with the weight of grief, but also something else, something that felt like the careful first steps of healing. Then I think Chinese sounds perfect, Nancy said firmly. Traditions are meant to be honored, not hidden away. Alex looked at her with something like gratitude, something like wonder. Yeah, he said. Yeah, okay. 20 minutes later, after Alex had jogged out to Mrs. Williams's car to apologize profusely and assure her the boys were safe, and after she'd given him what the twins later described as the look that means you're in trouble but she's not really mad, the 4 of them pushed through the doors of Golden Dragon. The restaurant was small and warmly lit, with red paper lanterns hanging from the ceiling and the smell of ginger and garlic heavy in the air. A handful of other diners occupied booths and tables, and soft instrumental music played from speakers mounted in the corners. An elderly Chinese woman behind the counter looked up as they entered, and her eyes went wide with recognition. "Alexander!" she exclaimed, coming around the counter with surprising speed. "And Curtis! Cooper! Oh my goodness, how you've grown!" Her expression shifted to something gentler, more concerned. "We've missed you. It's been too long." "Hi, Mrs. Chen," Alex said, and Nancy could hear the emotion in his voice. "It has been too long." Mrs. Chen's eyes moved to Nancy, curiosity sparking. "And who is this lovely woman?" "This is Nancy," Alex said, and Nancy noticed he didn't qualify it with friend or colleague or any other label, just her name. "Nancy, this is Mrs. Chen. She's been feeding my family for 8 years now?" 9, Mrs. Chen corrected with a warm smile, "since before these 2 were born." She gestured toward a booth by the window. "Please, sit. I'll bring your usual, yes? And for you, Nancy?" "The usual sounds wonderful," Nancy said, charmed by the woman's warmth. They settled into the booth, Curtis and Cooper on one side, Alex and Nancy on the other. The boys immediately grabbed the paper placemats and started working on the word search puzzle printed on them, their heads bent together in concentration. Alex watched them for a moment, then turned to Nancy. "Thank you," he said quietly, for tonight. "For not running away when my children staged an intervention." Nancy smiled. "You know, at first I thought I was being stood up. And I'll admit, I was disappointed, maybe even a little hurt." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "But then Curtis and Cooper walked in, and the whole evening changed. It stopped being about whether or not someone showed up for me and started being about connection. Real, messy, human connection." "That's a generous way of looking at it," Alex said. "Maybe," Nancy agreed. "Or maybe it's just the truth." Mrs. Chen returned with a pot of hot tea and 4 cups, pouring with practiced efficiency before disappearing back into the kitchen. The tea was fragrant, jasmine, Nancy thought, and the warmth of the cup felt good in her hands. "Can I ask you something?" Alex said after a moment. "Megan mentioned you've been at City General for 5 years. That's a long time in emergency medicine. What made you choose that path?" Nancy wrapped both hands around her teacup, feeling the heat seep into her palms. "Honestly, I wanted to help people. I wanted to make a difference." She paused. "And maybe, if I'm being really honest, I wanted to feel needed in a way that was clear and uncomplicated." Alex nodded slowly. "I understand that. After Sophia died, I threw myself into work for the same reason. Building systems, fixing problems, growing the company, it all made sense. It had rules, logic, clear outcomes. He glanced at his sons. Being a father, though, that was harder. They needed me in ways I didn't know how to show up for. But you did show up, Nancy said softly. They told me about the bedtime stories, the pancakes, the school events. You've been there, Alex. Physically, yes, Alex said, his voice tight. But emotionally, I think I've been somewhere else, somewhere safer. Curtis looked up from his word search. Daddy, we found Dragon. Good job, bud, Alex said, ruffling his son's hair with a fondness that made Nancy's chest ache. The food arrived in waves, platters of sweet and sour chicken, beef and broccoli, fried rice, spring rolls, and lo mein. The boys dug in enthusiastically, and conversation flowed more easily than Nancy could have imagined. She learned that Sophia had been a painter, that she'd worked from a studio in their garage and filled their house with canvases covered in bold colors and abstract shapes. That she'd been the one who insisted on matching outfits for the twins because life's too short not to have a little fun with fashion. That she'd died on a Tuesday, driving home from an art supply store, when an aneurysm ruptured without warning. She was 28, Alex said quietly, moving his food around his plate more than eating it. We'd been married for 7 years. I thought we had forever. I'm so sorry, Nancy whispered, and the words felt inadequate but necessary. The worst part, Alex continued, his voice barely audible above the restaurant's gentle noise, was how fast it happened. She was fine that morning. We'd had breakfast together. She'd kissed the boys goodbye, kissed me goodbye, said she'd be home by 3. He stopped, swallowing hard. By 5 o'clock, she was gone. Cooper had gone still beside his brother, his fork suspended over his plate. Curtis reached over and squeezed Cooper's hand. After that, I didn't know how to be anything except functional. I got the boys up, made their meals, got them to school. I went to work, fixed problems, built things. I came home, did bath time, read stories. I functioned, but I wasn't living. Alex looked at Nancy, his eyes raw with honesty. I think I forgot how. Mom said she wanted Daddy to smile more, Curtis blurted out suddenly, and everyone turned to look at him. His cheeks flushed, but he pushed forward. Before she died, I heard her tell Aunt Rachel on the phone that she wished Daddy would stop working so much and smile more. She said he had the best smile. The silence that followed was profound. Alex's face crumpled for just a moment before he pulled himself together, blinking rapidly. I didn't know you remembered that, he said hoarsely. We remember lots of things, Cooper said softly. Nancy felt tears prick her own eyes. She reached across the table and placed her hand over Alex's. She'd be proud you tried tonight, Nancy said, her voice gentle but firm. She'd be proud you're here, eating Chinese food with your boys and a woman you barely know, even though it scared you. That takes courage, Alex. Alex's hand turned under hers, his fingers curling around hers briefly before letting go. Thank you, he whispered. The moment held, tender and true, before Curtis, with the impeccable timing only children possess, said, Can we get fortune cookies? The adults laughed, breaking the tension, and Mrs. Chen appeared as if summoned with a plate of fortune cookies still warm from the kitchen. The rest of dinner was lighter. Stories about disastrous coding attempts, hospital shifts gone hilariously wrong, the twins' elaborate plans for a backyard rocket launch that terrified Alex just thinking about. Laughter came easier. The weight lifted, replaced by something warmer. When the check came, Alex insisted on paying. I owe you at least 50 dinners for tonight, he said. Let's start with one, Nancy replied with a smile. They cracked open their fortune cookies on the sidewalk outside, the storm having passed and left the air clean and cool. Curtis's read, Adventure awaits those brave enough to seek it. Cooper's. Family is not just who you're born with, but who you choose. Nancy's read, The best things come to those who wait. She looked up to find Alex watching her, his own fortune clutched in his hand. What does yours say? She asked. He held it up, and in the streetlight she could read, Sometimes being late is the universe's way of being right on time. They stared at each other and then both burst out laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from coincidence too perfect to be anything but cosmic. "Okay, that's just weird," Alex said, shaking his head. "The universe has a sense of humor," Nancy agreed. As they walked toward where Alex's car was parked, the twins running ahead to jump in puddles, Alex turned to Nancy. "Sorry I was late," he said, and this time it carried the weight of everything. The missed time, the fear, the years spent running from feeling. Nancy smiled, her heart full in a way it hadn't been in 5 years. "Maybe you were right on time." Alex smiled back, a real smile, the kind Sophia had once wished for. And Nancy knew that whatever this was, it was only just beginning. The following Saturday arrived wrapped in golden autumn sunlight and the kind of crisp morning air that promised the world was waking up clean and new. Nancy stood on the front porch of the Duke House at 9:07 a.m., holding a paper bag of fresh blueberries from the farmer's market and wondering if she was insane. It had been a week since that rainy evening at the cafe and Golden Dragon. A week of text messages that started polite and professional, "Thank you again for dinner," and gradually became easier, warmer. Photos of the twins at soccer practice, a meme about hospital coffee that made her laugh out loud during her lunch break, a late-night message from Alex. "The boys asked if you like pancakes. Apparently this is critical information." And then yesterday, "Saturday breakfast at our place? Fair warning, I burn at least 1 pancake per batch." 9 a.m.? She'd said yes before she could overthink it. Now, standing at the door of a beautiful 2-story home with a maple tree in the front yard and a basketball hoop over the garage, Nancy felt the flutter of nerves she'd been trying to ignore all morning. This was different from a cafe or a restaurant. This was their home, their space, the place where Sophia's paintings probably still hung on the walls and her memory lived in every corner. Before Nancy could knock, the door flew open. "You came!" Curtis and Cooper shouted in unison, both still in their pajamas, matching sets covered in cartoon rockets. They launched themselves at her with the enthusiasm of puppies, wrapping their arms around her waist. "I came," Nancy confirmed. Laughing and nearly dropping the blueberries, "I brought reinforcements for the pancakes." "Blueberries!" Cooper's eyes went wide. "Daddy, she brought blueberries!" "I heard," Alex's voice called from somewhere inside. "Let her breathe, boys." Curtis grabbed Nancy's hand and pulled her into the house. "Come on, Daddy's already burned 1 pancake and we haven't even started yet." The interior of the Duke home was warm and lived in, not magazine perfect, but comfortable. Toys were tucked into a basket by the stairs. A pile of mail sat on the console table. School artwork covered the refrigerator. And yes, paintings hung on the walls, bold splashes of color and abstract shapes that somehow felt joyful and melancholy at once. The kitchen was spacious with white cabinets and dark countertops, sunlight streaming through the windows over the sink. And there, standing at the stove in dark jeans and a navy apron that read, "Trust me, I'm an engineer," was Alex. He turned when they entered, and Nancy's breath caught slightly. He looked different here, more relaxed, more himself. His hair was slightly mussed like he'd just woken up, and there was a smudge of flour on his cheek. He was holding a spatula and looking simultaneously confident and utterly out of his depth. "Morning," he said, and his smile was both sheepish and genuinely happy. "Welcome to Saturday Pancake Chaos." "Good morning," Nancy replied, holding up the bag of blueberries. "I come bearing gifts." "You're a lifesaver," Alex said. "The boys have very strong opinions about pancake add-ins, and I was about to disappoint them with plain batter." "We like blueberries," Cooper confirmed seriously, "and chocolate chips. But Daddy says chocolate chips for breakfast is pushing it." "Chocolate chips are dessert disguised as breakfast," Alex said firmly, though his eyes sparkled with amusement. Nancy set the blueberries on the counter and surveyed the scene. The mixing bowl held batter that looked slightly lumpy. A burned pancake sat on a plate by itself, charred around the edges. The griddle was heating, already starting to smoke slightly. "How can I help?" Nancy asked, rolling up her sleeves. "You can supervise," Alex said. or judge. Both are equally valuable right now. Curtis tugged on Nancy's sleeve. "Miss Nancy, can you help Daddy flip the pancakes? He's not very good at it yet." "Yet," Alex emphasized, pointing the spatula at his son. "I'm improving." "Mom used to flip them really high," Cooper added quietly, his voice carrying that particular weight of memory. "Like this." He demonstrated with his hands, showing an exaggerated upward motion. The kitchen went quiet for a heartbeat. Alex's hand tightened on the spatula, his expression flickering with something painful before he recovered. "Your mom was very talented at many things," he said softly, "including pancake aerobatics." Nancy stepped closer to the stove, her nurse instincts recognizing the moment of grief and gently moving past it without dismissing it. "Well, I can't promise aerobatics, but I can probably help with the basics. What do you say, Chef Duke? Want a sous chef?" Alex looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression softened with gratitude. "I'd love one." They fell into an easy rhythm. Alex poured the batter while Nancy added blueberries and managed the flipping. The twins set the table with a level of chaos that involved more dropped forks than necessary, but eventually resulted in 4 place settings. Music played from a speaker on the counter, something acoustic and gentle. "Okay, this one's ready," Nancy announced, sliding a perfectly golden pancake onto the serving plate. "Show off," Alex teased, bumping her shoulder lightly with his. "I have steady hands," Nancy said. 5 years of suturing has its benefits." The pancakes piled up, some perfect, some slightly misshapen, all of them smelling like butter and warmth and Saturday mornings that felt like home. When they finally sat down at the kitchen table, the boys dove in with syrup and enthusiasm, while Alex poured coffee for the adults. "This is really nice," Nancy said, cutting into her own stack. "Thank you for inviting me." "Thank you for coming," Alex replied, "and for not judging my pancake skills too harshly. The burned one built character," Nancy said seriously. Curtis snorted mid-bite, and Cooper dissolved into giggles. Halfway through breakfast, Cooper set down his fork and looked at Nancy with sudden seriousness. "Miss Nancy?" "Yes, sweetie." "Do you know how to braid hair?" Nancy blinked, surprised by the question. "I do, actually. Why?" Cooper climbed down from his chair and disappeared into the living room. He returned carrying a doll, one with long brown hair that looked like it had been through several adventures, and possibly a washing machine. "This is Lily," he explained. "She was Mom's when she was little. Daddy gave her to us after. "Cooper," Alex started gently, but Nancy shook her head slightly. "Lily's beautiful," Nancy said warmly. "Does she need a braid?" Cooper nodded, holding the doll out tentatively. "Daddy tries, but his fingers are too big. The braids always get lumpy." "Hey," Alex protested mildly, but he was smiling. "They're rustic braids." "They're messy," Curtis corrected. Nancy took the doll carefully, recognizing the weight of what was being offered. This wasn't just about braiding hair, it was about trust, about being allowed into spaces still tender with loss. "How about after breakfast?" Nancy suggested. "We'll give Lily a proper braid, maybe even 2. Cooper's face lit up. "Really?" "Really." The rest of breakfast passed in comfortable conversation and laughter. The boys told Nancy about their upcoming science fair project, something involving volcanoes and controlled explosions that made Alex look vaguely terrified. Nancy shared a story about a patient who'd come into the ER with a potato stuck in his ear, which the twins found hilarious. When the plates were cleared, Nancy found herself at the sink with Alex, washing dishes while the boys played in the living room. Soft morning light filtered through the window, and the domesticity of the moment, standing side by side, hands in soapy water, the sound of children's laughter nearby, felt surreal and right all at once. "They really like you," Alex said quietly, scrubbing at a particularly stubborn bit of batter on the griddle. "I really like them," Nancy replied honestly. "They're remarkable, Alex." "You've raised remarkable kids." "I don't know about that," Alex said, his voice uncertain. "Most days I feel like I'm barely keeping it together, like I'm doing everything wrong." Nancy set down the plate she was drying and turned to face him. "Alex, look at me." He did, his hand still in the sink, water dripping from his fingers. "You're doing better than you think," Nancy said firmly. Those boys are happy. They're confident. They're brave enough to orchestrate blind dates because they believe their father deserves happiness. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens because they have a dad who shows up every single day, even when it's hard. Alex's throat worked as he swallowed, emotion flickering across his face. It's been hard, he admitted. Every day for 3 years it's been hard. Getting up, making breakfast, going to work, coming home, doing it all again. Some days I'm not sure I'm actually living or just going through motions. But you're here now, Nancy said softly. You invited me into your home. You made pancakes. Well, we made pancakes. You're trying, Alex. That's what matters. He opened his mouth to respond, but whatever he was about to say was interrupted by a shout from the living room. Pancake attack! Both adults turned just in time to see Curtis wind up and throw a leftover pancake frisbee style across the room. It sailed through the air in slow motion before smacking against Cooper's chest, leaving a small butter stain on his rocket pajamas. Curtis Alexander Duke! Alex shouted, but there was no real anger in it. It was a tactical strike, Curtis defended. Cooper, instead of crying or getting upset, picked up the pancake and took a deliberate bite. Tastes like victory, he announced solemnly. Nancy and Alex looked at each other for one suspended moment, and then both burst out laughing, the kind of laughter that comes from surprise and absurdity and the sheer chaos of life with children. I should probably... Alex gestured vaguely toward the living room. Probably, Nancy agreed, still laughing. But neither of them moved right away. They stood there in the kitchen, water still dripping from Alex's hands, dish towel clutched in Nancy's, and smiled at each other like people who'd just discovered something unexpected. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of it, the shape of what could be. Okay, Alex finally said, wiping his hands on his apron. I'll go confiscate the pancake weapons. You good here? I'm good, Nancy said. As Alex headed into the living room to mediate the Great Pancake War, Nancy finished drying the last dish. Through the doorway, she could see them, Alex kneeling down to the twins' level, his hands on their shoulders as he said something that made them both giggle. Cooper still holding the doll named Lily, Curtis pointing to something on the wall, probably one of Sophia's paintings. A family, Nancy thought, still healing, still learning how to be whole again. And somehow, impossibly, she'd been invited into it. Not to replace what they'd lost, she'd never try to do that, but to be part of what they were becoming. Nancy hung the dish towel and walked into the living room where 3 pairs of eyes turned to greet her, and for the first time in 5 years, she felt like she'd come home. 3 weeks after the pancake breakfast, Nancy found herself standing in the lobby of Duke Technologies at 10:47 p.m., still wearing her scrubs and feeling the bone-deep exhaustion that came from a double shift in the ER. She should have gone home, should have peeled off her clothes, taken a hot shower, and collapsed into bed. But Alex's text had come through 20 minutes ago. Still at the office. The boys fell asleep here. I know you're off shift soon. Want to come by? Could use the company. And somehow, tired as she was, Nancy had found herself driving across the city instead of toward her apartment. The security guard at the desk, a middle-aged man with kind eyes named Marcus, smiled in recognition. Miss Butler, right? Mr. Duke said you might stop by. 15th floor, take a left off the elevator. Can't miss it. Thank you, Nancy said, wondering exactly how often Alex talked about her to his security staff. The elevator hummed as it climbed, and Nancy caught her reflection in the polished doors. Her curly hair was pulled back in a messy bun, her face bare of makeup, exhaustion written in the shadows under her eyes. Not exactly the polished image she might have wanted to present, but at this point in whatever this was with Alex, pretense felt unnecessary. The 15th floor was mostly dark, illuminated only by emergency lighting and the glow spilling from one office at the far end of the hall. Nancy walked toward it, her sneakers silent on the carpet, and paused in the doorway. Alex sat at his desk, bathed in the blue-white light of multiple monitors, his fingers moving across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. But it was the scene behind him that made Nancy's heart squeeze. On a small couch against the wall, Curtis and Cooper were curled together under a Duke Technologies branded blanket, their faces peaceful in sleep. Curtis had his arm thrown over his brother protectively, and Cooper clutched a small stuffed dinosaur. Alex must have sensed her presence because he looked up, and his face transformed, the lines of stress smoothing into something warmer. "You came," he said softly, careful not to wake the boys. "You said you needed company," Nancy replied, stepping into the office. "And I had a feeling you were using work as an excuse not to take your sleeping children home." Alex had the grace to look sheepish. "There was a bug in the system. I told myself I'd just fix it quickly, and then—" He gestured to the screens. 4 hours later. "Alex," Nancy said gently, but without judgment. "I know," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I'm doing it again, hiding in work." He glanced at his sons. They didn't want to go home without me, said they'd rather sleep here than in their beds if it meant not being alone. Nancy's chest tightened. "They love you." "They shouldn't have to camp out at their dad's office to spend time with him," Alex said, his voice thick with guilt. "No," Nancy agreed quietly. "But they do it anyway, because they'd rather be here with you than comfortable without you. That says something, Alex." He looked at her for a long moment, then stood from his chair. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." Nancy followed him out of the office and down a short hallway to a door marked Roof Access, Authorized Personnel Only. Alex punched in a code, and the door swung open to reveal a staircase. They climbed one flight, and then Alex pushed open another door, and suddenly they were outside. The rooftop stretched before them, a flat expanse with heating units and ventilation systems, but also a small seating area with benches and potted plants that someone had clearly tried to make inviting. But the real draw was the view. The city spread out below them in a carpet of lights, buildings glittering, streets tracing patterns, the distant glow of the downtown skyline. "Wow," Nancy breathed. "I come up here sometimes," Alex said, walking to the railing. "When the office feels too small. When my head gets too loud." He leaned against the metal barrier, looking out at the city. "Sophia used to say that perspective was everything, that when you felt stuck, you needed to find a higher vantage point." Nancy joined him at the railing, standing close enough that their shoulders almost touched. The night air was cool but not uncomfortable, carrying the distant sounds of traffic and city life. "Can I tell you something?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Always." He was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "After Sophia died, I felt guilty about everything. Guilty that I was alive and she wasn't. Guilty that I'd spent so many late nights at the office when I could have been home with her. Guilty that I didn't know how to be enough for Curtis and Cooper when they needed both parents." He paused, his knuckles white where he gripped the railing. "But the worst guilt? The one that's kept me locked in place for 3 years? It's the guilt I feel when I'm happy." Nancy's heart cracked at the raw honesty in his voice. "Every time I laugh," Alex continued, "every time I enjoy something, every time I feel even a moment of joy, there's this voice in my head that says I don't deserve it, that Sophia's gone and I'm here, and what right do I have to be happy when she never got the chance to watch our boys grow up?" "Alex," "And then you walked into my life," he said, finally turning to look at her. "You and your patience and your kindness and the way you see my sons, really see them. And suddenly I'm feeling things I haven't felt in years, and the guilt is there, but so is something else. Something that feels like hope? Maybe? And I don't know what to do with that." Nancy reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "I understand more than you know," she said softly. "I've spent 5 years hiding in the ER, saving other people's lives because it was easier than living my own. Every time someone asked me on a date or my friends tried to set me up, I had an excuse, a shift, a patient, an emergency. But really?" She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Really, I was just terrified." "Of what?" Alex asked. "Of caring about someone enough that losing them would destroy me," Nancy admitted. I see it every day. Families sitting in waiting rooms, praying their loved ones pull through. Wives losing husbands, parents losing children. And I save as many as I can, but I can't save everyone. And the thought of loving someone that much, of building a life with them, only to have it ripped away. She shook her head. It felt easier to just not try. Alex squeezed her hand. So what changed? Nancy smiled, tears pricking her eyes. 2 boys in yellow shirts walked into a cafe and reminded me that the best things in life don't happen because we're ready. They happen because we're brave enough to show up anyway. They stood there in silence, the city lights twinkling below, their hands intertwined, sharing the weight of their fears and their hope. "I'm scared, Nancy," Alex finally whispered. "I'm scared of failing you. I'm scared of my boys getting attached and then something going wrong. I'm scared that I'm not ready, that I'll never be ready." "I'm scared too," Nancy said. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe we're supposed to be scared." Alex turned to face her fully, his free hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. "I don't want to hurt you." "I don't want to hurt you either," Nancy replied. "But I also don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering what could have been if I'd just been brave enough to try." "Sophia used to say something," Alex said, his thumb brushing across Nancy's cheekbone. "She said that life doesn't give you fresh starts. It gives you second chances, and what you do with them is up to you." Nancy leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. "Maybe we both needed a second chance, not a fresh start." "Maybe we did," Alex agreed. They stood there, foreheads almost touching, the space between them charged with possibility and fear and something fragile and new. Nancy thought he might kiss her. Part of her wanted him to, but he didn't. Instead, he just held her face gently, looking at her like she was something precious he was afraid to break. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" "For showing up. For staying. For being patient with a guy who burns pancakes and hides from his feelings and has 2 children who stage interventions." Nancy laughed, the sound breaking the tension. "Those children are my favorite part." "They're pretty great," Alex agreed with a smile. "Alex?" Nancy said softly. "Yeah?" "We don't have to figure everything out tonight. We can just take it one day at a time. One pancake breakfast at a time. One late-night rooftop conversation at a time." Relief flooded Alex's features. "That sounds perfect." They stayed on the rooftop a while longer, talking about nothing and everything. Nancy's shift, a particularly difficult trauma case, Alex's latest project, the twins' upcoming school play. The conversation was easy, comfortable, the kind of talk that happens between people learning to trust each other. Eventually, they made their way back downstairs to Alex's office. Curtis and Cooper were still sleeping soundly on the couch, the blanket rising and falling with their breathing. "I should get them home," Alex said reluctantly, glancing at his watch. It was past midnight. "And you should get some sleep too," Nancy said, poking him gently in the chest. "No more hiding and work, remember?" "Yes, ma'am," Alex said with a tired smile. Nancy helped him gather the boys' things, backpacks, a tablet, Cooper's dinosaur. Alex lifted Curtis first, the boy barely stirring as his father cradled him. Nancy instinctively reached for Cooper, carefully lifting him. He was heavier than she expected, solid and warm in her arms. As they walked toward the elevator, Cooper stirred slightly. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and sleepy. He looked at Nancy, then at his father, carrying Curtis, then back at Nancy. "Miss Nancy?" he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. "I'm here, sweetie," Nancy said softly. "We're taking you home." "Okay," Cooper said, his head dropping against her shoulder. Then, in that unfiltered way of children half asleep, he mumbled, "Daddy, are you going to marry her?" Nancy froze mid-step. Alex stopped so abruptly, Curtis let out a small protest in his sleep. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, neither adult moved or breathed. Then Cooper, already drifting back to sleep, added, "'Cause that would be nice." Alex's eyes met Nancy's over the boys' heads. His expression was a mixture of mortification, amusement, and something that looked suspiciously like hope. And then they both started laughing, quiet, careful laughter that shook their shoulders and made the boys stir, but not wake. The kind of laughter that comes from surprise and truth and the knowledge that 6-year-olds see things adults try too hard to hide. "We should probably talk about that," Alex whispered, still grinning. "Eventually," Nancy agreed, adjusting Cooper in her arms, "but not tonight." "Not tonight," Alex confirmed. They rode the elevator down in comfortable silence, both smiling like idiots, carrying sleeping boys and the weight of possibilities neither was quite ready to name. But someday, Nancy thought, watching Alex's reflection in the elevator doors. Someday soon. 5 months later. Riverside Cafe, 6:30 p.m. Nancy arrived at the cafe exactly on time. Her heart doing a peculiar flutter she still wasn't used to, even after months of Saturday pancakes, late-night rooftop talks, and slowly learning to build a life that included more than just hospital shifts and solitude. Alex had texted that morning. Same place it all started. 6:30. Wear something nice? The boys insist it's important. She'd chosen a deep burgundy dress, simple but elegant, and left her curly hair down the way Cooper said he liked it. "Because it looks like a fairy tale," he'd explained seriously. As she pushed through the cafe door, the familiar chime announcing her arrival, Nancy was struck by how different this felt from that night 5 months ago when she'd sat alone, cold coffee in hand, convinced she'd been stood up. The cafe looked almost the same warm lighting, the same soft jazz, the same corner table, but everything else had changed. Curtis and Cooper sat at that very table, dressed in matching navy suits with crisp white shirts and bow ties that were slightly crooked, despite what had clearly been careful attempts to straighten them. Their faces lit up the moment they saw her. "Miss Nancy!" Curtis called, waving enthusiastically. "You came," Cooper added, bouncing in his seat. Nancy approached the table, her smile growing wider. "Of course I came. You two look incredibly handsome. What's the special occasion?" The twins exchanged one of their meaningful glances, the kind that had become wonderfully familiar over the past months. Curtis's expression held barely contained excitement. Cooper looked like he might explode from the weight of whatever secret they were keeping. "We have something for you," Curtis announced, reaching into his jacket pocket with the solemnity of someone presenting state secrets. "But you have to promise not to look until we say," Cooper added quickly. "I promise," Nancy said, her curiosity thoroughly piqued. Curtis pulled out a folded piece of paper, thick cardstock, carefully creased. He held it out to Nancy with both hands, his expression serious. "This is from both of us. We worked really hard on it." Nancy took the paper, feeling its weight in her palm. "Can I open it now?" "Not yet," both boys said in unison. "Okay," Nancy laughed. "When?" "When Daddy gets here," Cooper said, glancing toward the door with barely suppressed anticipation. "Where is your dad?" Nancy asked, looking around. Alex's car had been in the parking lot. She'd seen it when she arrived. "He's here," Curtis said mysteriously. "He's just preparing." Before Nancy could ask what that meant, movement caught her eye. Other cafe patrons had turned in their seats, their attention drawn to something near the counter. Nancy followed their gazes and felt her breath catch. Alex stood near the entrance to the back patio, wearing a charcoal gray suit that fit him perfectly, a crisp white shirt, and a navy tie that matched his son's bow ties. But it wasn't the clothes that stopped her heart. It was the expression on his face, nervous, hopeful, terrified, radiantly happy, all at once. Their eyes met across the cafe, and everything else seemed to fade. He walked toward her, not rushed, but purposeful, and Nancy noticed his hands were trembling slightly. When he reached the table, he smiled at his sons. "Good job, boys," he said softly. "We didn't tell her anything," Curtis reported proudly. "Not even when she asked where you were," Cooper added. Alex knelt down beside the table, putting himself at eye level with Nancy, and she felt her heart start to race. He wasn't, was he? "Nancy," Alex began, and his voice was steady despite the emotion clearly running through him. 5 months ago, I was sitting in my office, terrified to come to this cafe, terrified of trying again, terrified of opening my heart to the possibility of something new. He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. I almost didn't show up."
"I remember," Nancy whispered.
"But these two," Alex glanced at his sons with profound love. "They were braver than I was. They showed up when I couldn't. They believed I deserved a second chance even when I didn't believe it myself." Curtis and Cooper sat perfectly still, their eyes wide and shining. "And then I walked through that door," Alex continued, his voice growing stronger, "soaking wet and embarrassingly late, and I saw you sitting here with my sons. You'd waited, you'd stayed, and you looked at me, at all three of us, like we were worth the wait." Nancy felt tears beginning to gather at the corners of her eyes. "The past 5 months have been—" Alex paused, searching for words. "They've been like learning to breathe again, like remembering what it feels like to laugh without guilt, to hope without fear, to imagine a future that isn't just about surviving, but about actually living." His hand found hers, warm and solid. "You did that, Nancy. You walked into our lives and reminded us what family really means." "Alex," Nancy breathed, but he shook his head gently. "Curtis, Cooper," Alex said, his voice tender. "Now." The boys nodded in unison. "Open the note, Miss Nancy," Curtis instructed. With shaking fingers, Nancy unfolded the paper. Inside, in careful 6-year-old handwriting, Curtis's bold letters and Cooper's gentler script alternating line by line, was a message. "Dear Miss Nancy, we think you're really nice. You make good pancakes, better than Daddy. You braid hair good. You laugh at our jokes. You make Daddy smile the real way, not the fake way. We talked about it a lot. We want you to be our family forever. So our question is, will you be our mom? Love, Curtis and Cooper. Duke. P.S. Daddy has a question too." Nancy looked up from the note, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. Curtis and Cooper watched her with expressions so hopeful, so vulnerable, it broke her heart and put it back together simultaneously. And then she saw Alex. He'd moved. While she'd been reading, he'd shifted position. He was on one knee. In his hand was a small velvet box, open to reveal a ring, simple and elegant. A single diamond on a platinum band that caught the cafe light and threw tiny rainbows across the table. The cafe had gone completely silent. Every conversation had stopped. Every patron had turned to watch. Even the barista stood frozen behind the counter, her hand over her heart. "Nancy Butler," Alex said, and his voice cracked with emotion. "I'm sorry I'm late. I'm sorry it took me 3 years and 2 interfering children to find the courage to live again. I'm sorry that I almost missed this, almost missed you." He paused, blinking rapidly. "But I'm here now. I'm finally here, and I'm asking you, begging you, to give me the honor of spending the rest of my life showing up for you the way you've shown up for us." Nancy couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stare at this man who'd been broken and was slowly piecing himself back together, who was offering her not just his heart, but his whole life, including 2 extraordinary boys who'd already claimed pieces of her soul. "Will you marry me?" Alex whispered. "Will you be my wife and their mother and our family?" "Say yes," Cooper whispered urgently. "Please say yes." "We practiced a celebration dance," Curtis added, barely able to contain himself. "But we can only do it if you say yes." A laugh burst out of Nancy, wet and joyful and disbelieving. She looked at the ring, at Alex's hopeful face, at Curtis and Cooper practically vibrating with anticipation. And suddenly, the answer was the easiest thing she'd ever had to give. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times, yes." The cafe erupted. Applause thundered through the space. Strangers cheered. Someone whistled. The barista shouted, "Finally!" and immediately looked embarrassed. Alex's hands shook as he slipped the ring onto Nancy's finger, a perfect fit, like it had been made for her all along. Then he stood, pulling her up with him, and wrapped his arms around her, holding her so tight she could feel his heart hammering against hers. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "Thank you for waiting. Thank you for staying. Thank you for choosing us." "Thank you for being brave enough to try," Nancy whispered back. "Excuse me," Curtis's voice cut through their moment. "We said we get to hug too." Nancy and Alex broke apart, laughing, and suddenly the twins were there, Curtis and Cooper launching themselves at both adults, creating a tangle of arms and bow ties and pure, unfiltered joy. "You said yes!" Cooper shouted, his face pressed against Nancy's dress. "We're going to be a real family," Curtis added, his voice muffled against Alex's suit jacket. "We already are a real family," Nancy said, dropping to her knees so she could hold both boys properly. "We have been for a while now." "But now it's official," Cooper said seriously. "Now you're going to be our mom, for real, forever." "Forever," Nancy confirmed, her voice thick with tears and laughter. "I'm going to be your mom forever." Curtis pulled back slightly, his expression suddenly concerned. "You're still going to make pancakes on Saturdays, right?" "Absolutely," Nancy promised. "And you'll still do the voices when you read stories?" Cooper asked. "Every single night." "And you'll love Daddy even when he works too much?" Curtis pressed. Nancy looked up at Alex, who was watching this exchange with tears streaming down his face, making no attempt to hide them. "Especially then," she said softly, "because that's what family does. We show up for each other, even when it's hard." The cafe manager appeared with a tray of champagne glasses and sparkling cider, offering them to the newly engaged family on the house, but other patrons came by to offer congratulations, some with tears in their own eyes, moved by the scene they'd just witnessed. Mrs. Chen from Golden Dragon appeared seemingly out of nowhere, having been tipped off by Alex. "I knew it!" she exclaimed, hugging Nancy fiercely. "I told my husband, that man finally found someone who sees him. I'm so happy." As the celebration continued around them, Nancy found herself back at that corner table, the same table where she'd sat 5 months ago, alone and disappointed. She looked at the chair she'd occupied that night, and then at the 3 people now surrounding her, her people, her family, and marveled at how completely everything had changed. Alex slid into the seat beside her, his arm around her shoulders. Curtis and Cooper sat across from them, sharing a glass of sparkling cider and arguing over who got to tell which friends first. "Look at us," Alex murmured. "Back where it started." Nancy leaned into him, her left hand catching the light, the ring on her finger sparkling with promise. "Back where it started," she agreed. "But everything's different now." "Everything," Alex confirmed, pressing a kiss to her temple. Cooper looked up from his drink, his expression suddenly thoughtful. "Daddy, does this mean Miss Nancy becomes Mrs. Nancy?" "Mrs. Duke," Curtis corrected. "Nancy Duke. That sounds really good." Nancy tested the name silently. Nancy Duke. And yes, it did sound good. It sounded like home, like family, like a future she'd stopped believing was possible. "I like it," she said softly. "I really like it." Alex's arm tightened around her, and when she looked up at him, the smile on his face was the same one Curtis and Cooper had once told her about, the real one, the one Sophia had wished for, not shadowed by grief or guilt, just pure, unfiltered happiness. "Me too," he said. "I really like it too." And there, in the Riverside Cafe, where 2 little boys had once walked in and said, "Sorry, our daddy's late," a new chapter began. Not a replacement of what was lost, but an expansion of what was possible, a reminder that love doesn't wait for perfect timing. It just needs brave people willing to show up, even if they're late. 1 year later, the Duke family backyard. Late afternoon. The September sky was the kind of blue that seemed painted on, endless and clear, with just a few wispy clouds drifting like brushstrokes across a canvas. The backyard had been transformed. White chairs arranged in neat rows faced a simple wooden arch wrapped in eucalyptus and white roses. String lights crisscrossed overhead, waiting for evening to make them glow. A small quartet played soft classical music in the corner, and the air smelled of late summer flowers and freshly cut grass. Nancy stood in the spare bedroom that had been converted into a makeshift bridal suite, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. Her dress was simple but elegant, ivory lace with delicate sleeves, fitted at the waist and flowing to the floor. Her curly hair was swept to one side, held with a clip that had belonged to her grandmother. She wore minimal makeup, just enough to enhance the happiness that seemed to radiate from her skin. "You look beautiful," Megan said from the doorway. She'd been the one to set all this in motion with that blind date setup a year and a half ago, and now she stood as Nancy's maid of honor, tears already threatening her carefully applied mascara. "Alex is going to lose his mind when he sees you." "I'm getting married," Nancy said, still slightly disbelieving. "I'm actually getting married." "To a wonderful man," Megan added, "and two amazing boys who absolutely adore you." "They asked if they could call me Mom yesterday," Nancy said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not Miss Nancy anymore, just Mom." "And what did you say?" "I cried for 10 minutes and then said yes," Nancy admitted with a laugh. "Cooper made me promise I wouldn't cry during the wedding, but I think we both know that's not going to happen." A knock on the door interrupted them. "Miss Nancy?" Curtis's voice called. "Can we come in? We have something for you." "Come in," Nancy called, turning toward the door. Curtis and Cooper entered, and Nancy's breath caught. They wore matching gray suits with yellow shirts, a deliberate echo of that night at the cafe, and tiny boutonnieres made of white roses. Their hair was neatly combed, though Curtis's was already rebelling slightly. They looked so grown up, so serious, that Nancy felt her heart squeeze. "You look like Mom," Cooper said softly, and there was no sadness in it, only wonder. "Like a princess, Mom." "We have something for you," Curtis said, stepping forward. He held out a small, wrapped box. "Daddy said it was okay to give it to you now, instead of waiting." Nancy took the box with trembling hands and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a delicate silver bracelet with 3 charms, a stethoscope, a laptop, and 2 small figures holding hands. "The stethoscope is for you being a nurse," Cooper explained. "The laptop is for Daddy being a computer guy, and the 2 people holding hands, that's us," Curtis finished. "Me and Cooper, because we brought you together." Nancy's vision blurred with tears. "It's perfect," she whispered, fastening it around her wrist. "Thank you, boys. Thank you so much." "Don't cry yet," Curtis said pragmatically. "Save some tears for the actual wedding." Nancy laughed wetly. "I'll do my best." A soft knock announced Alex's best man, Marcus from the office, poking his head in. "It's time," he said with a warm smile. "The groom is getting antsy, and I'm pretty sure he's going to wear a hole in the grass with his pacing." Nancy stood at the back entrance to the yard. Her arm linked through her father's, a quiet man who'd flown in from Arizona and who'd told her that morning, with tears in his eyes, that he was proud of her for finally letting herself be happy. The music shifted, the guests stood, and Nancy began to walk. The aisle seemed both impossibly long and far too short. Faces turned toward her. Friends from the hospital, Alex's colleagues, neighbors, Mrs. Williams beaming from the second row, Mrs. Chen dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. But Nancy's focus was on the 3 figures waiting under the arch. Curtis and Cooper stood on either side of their father, each holding something unexpected. Not flowers or rings, but a small laptop computer, closed and polished to a shine. It was the original laptop Alex had used to start Duke Technologies, the foundation on which he'd built his entire company and the shield he'd hidden behind for 3 years after losing Sophia. And in the center, in a charcoal suit that made him look devastatingly handsome, stood Alex. His eyes were already bright with unshed tears, and when he saw Nancy, his expression transformed into something so full of love and wonder that she nearly stumbled. "This is real," Nancy thought. "This is my life now." When she reached the arch, her father kissed her cheek and placed her hand in Alex's. His fingers were warm, steady, and just slightly trembling. "Hi," Alex whispered. "Hi," Nancy whispered back. The officiant, a friend of Alex's from college, smiled at them. "We're gathered here today to witness the joining of Nancy Butler and Alexander Duke, and to celebrate the family they've already begun building together." The ceremony flowed like water, traditional words mixed with personal touches. Friends read poems about love and second chances. The officiant spoke about how family isn't always given to us. Sometimes it's chosen, built piece by people brave enough to try. And then came the vows. Alex went first, pulling a folded piece of paper from his pocket. His hands shook as he unfolded it. "Nancy," he began, his voice rough with emotion. 18 months ago, I was a man going through the motions of living without actually being alive. I'd forgotten what it meant to hope, to dream, to believe that joy was allowed after loss. He paused, blinking rapidly. And then, two terrible matchmakers, he glanced at his sons with a watery smile, decided to take matters into their own hands. Gentle laughter rippled through the guests. "You could have walked away that night," Alex continued. "You could have left when I was late, when my children ambushed you, when everything was awkward and messy and completely wrong. But you stayed. You saw past the grief and the fear and the walls I'd built, and you chose us anyway." His voice broke. "You chose all three of us. And in doing so, you taught me that love doesn't replace what we've lost. It expands to include what we've found. Sophia will always be part of our story, part of who Curtis and Cooper are, part of the man I became. But you, Nancy, you're part of the man I'm still becoming, the man I want to be. And I promise to spend the rest of my life showing up for you, on time, every single day." Nancy was crying openly now, not even trying to hide it. She took a shaky breath and began her own vows, speaking from her heart without notes. "Alex, Curtis, Cooper, because these vows are for all three of you. I came to that cafe 18 months ago, hoping to maybe find companionship, someone to share coffee with occasionally, someone to text goodnight." She smiled through her tears. "I had no idea I was about to find my entire world." Cooper wiped his eyes. Curtis bit his lip, fighting his own tears. "Love doesn't wait for perfect timing," Nancy continued, her voice growing stronger. "It doesn't wait until you're healed or ready or sure. It just needs brave people willing to show up, even when they're afraid, even when they're late, even when they think they've forgotten how." She looked at Alex, her heart in her eyes. "You showed up, Alex, soaking wet and apologetic and terrified, but you showed up, and you've kept showing up every day since, so I promise you this. I will show up too, on good days and hard days, on Saturday morning pancake days and late night crisis days. I will show up for this family we're building, for the boys who chose me before I even knew I needed to be chosen, and for the man who taught me that second chances are real." The officiant's voice was suspiciously thick when he spoke. "Curtis and Cooper have asked if they could do something special before we continue." The twins stepped forward, setting the laptop carefully on a small table beside the arch. Then Cooper pulled 2 yellow balloons from behind his chair, they'd been hidden there the whole time, and handed one to his brother. "Before we become a family officially," Curtis said, his young voice clear and strong, "we wanted to do something for Mom, our first mom, and for everyone. This yellow balloon," Cooper held up his, "is for our mom, Sophia, because she loved us and she loved Daddy, and even though she's in heaven now, she's still part of us. And we think she'd be really happy about today." Nancy's hand flew to her mouth. Alex's jaw worked as he fought to maintain composure. "And this yellow balloon," Curtis held up his, "is for Daddy not being late anymore, because he promised Mom Nancy, that he'd show up on time from now on. And also because yellow was the color Cooper and I wore the night we saved Daddy's date." The guests laughed softly, many wiping their own tears. Together, Curtis and Cooper released the balloons. They rose slowly into that perfect blue sky, drifting upward and away, 2 bright spots of yellow against the endless blue. Everyone watched in silence until they were just specks, and then gone. "One for remembering," Cooper whispered, "and one for moving forward." The ceremony continued through rings and pronouncements, through the official words that made them husband and wife, through the kiss that sealed promises made and a future chosen. "I present to you," the officiant announced with a huge smile, "the Duke family." The guests erupted in applause. Curtis and Cooper cheered loudly, and then the 4 of them, Alex, Nancy, Curtis, and Cooper came together in a group hug that was captured by a dozen camera phones and would become Nancy's favorite photo, even more than the formal portraits. That evening, as the sun set and the string lights glowed to life, the backyard had transformed into something magical. The chairs had been cleared away, replaced by small tables with candles and flowers. The quartet had been replaced by a DJ playing everything from classical to current pop. Children ran between tables while adults laughed and danced. Nancy stood at the edge of the dance floor, watching Curtis and Cooper show some of their school friends the proper way to dance at weddings, which apparently involved a lot of spinning and several moves borrowed from video games. Alex approached from behind, sliding his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "Mrs. Duke," he murmured, "how does it feel?" "Like I'm dreaming," Nancy admitted, leaning back against him. "Like I'm going to wake up and still be sitting in that cafe, alone, with my cold coffee." "If you do," Alex said, "I promise 2 boys in yellow shirts will walk in any minute." Nancy turned in his arms, looping her hands behind his neck. "Dance with me?" "Always." They swayed together as the DJ played something slow and sweet. Around them, other couples joined, Megan with her husband, Marcus with his wife, even Curtis and Cooper attempting to dance together and mostly just stepping on each other's feet. "Thank you," Alex whispered, "for everything, for staying, for being patient, for loving us." "Thank you for being late," Nancy replied with a smile. "If you'd been on time, we might have had a perfectly pleasant coffee date and never seen each other again, but because you were late, I got to meet your sons first. I got to see who you really are before we put on our best behavior for each other." "That's a very generous interpretation of disaster," Alex teased. "That's called love," Nancy corrected, finding the gift in the mess. As the evening wore on, Nancy found herself stepping away from the celebration for just a moment, standing at the edge of the property where she could see the whole scene, the lights, the laughter, the family and friends gathered in joy. She thought about the woman she'd been 18 months ago, lonely, guarded, convinced that work was enough, that being needed was the same as being loved. She thought about the empty chair in the cafe, the cold coffee, the disappointment that had felt like one more confirmation that she was meant to be alone. And then she thought about 2 boys in yellow shirts, marching through a door with determination and hope, refusing to let their father hide from life anymore. "Sometimes love doesn't come on time," Nancy whispered to herself, to the universe, to whatever force had orchestrated that perfect storm of circumstances. "Sometimes it walks in wearing yellow shirts and says, 'Sorry, our daddy is late,' and that's how the best stories begin." "Mom!" Cooper's voice called from the dance floor. "You have to come do the family dance. Curtis and Daddy are doing it wrong." "I am not doing it wrong," Curtis protested loudly. "Boys, we're all doing it perfectly," Alex said diplomatically, though Nancy could hear the laughter in his voice. Nancy turned back toward her family, and yes, they were hers now, completely and fully, and walked back into the light, into the laughter, into the life she'd stopped believing was possible. And somewhere, high above in that endless blue sky, 2 yellow balloons drifted together through the clouds, carrying memories of what was and hopes for what would be. One for the love that was lost but never forgotten. One for the love that arrived late but right on time. And below, in a backyard filled with string lights and joy, a family danced together, built not from perfection, but from courage, from showing up, and from believing that the best things in life are worth the wait, even if they're a little late. The end. Love isn't about perfect timing. It's about brave hearts willing to show up, even when they're scared, even when they're late, even when they think they've forgotten how. This is for everyone still waiting at the cafe. Your yellow shirts are coming. Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.